All right. Good afternoon, friends. Good morning to our friends and colleagues in the West. My name is Doug Baus. I am Vice President for Client Services with Money for Ministry, and I'm going to be your host today for this webinar, What Major Donors Are Thinking in 2020. It's a live interview with Mike Buwalda of Money for Ministry and Derek Baker, and I see we have Paul Martin has joined us as well from Dickerson Baker and Associates. I am sure that many of you are as eager to get started as I am, but I do have just a few notes and instructions before we do so. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be made available to you afterwards. So if you want to share it with others on your team that couldn't be with us today, you are more than welcome to do so. We are planning a question and answer time as part of our time together today. Some of you have submitted questions beforehand. That's great. Thank you. I have those. You also may submit questions as we go along today. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and if you click that and keep it open, you can type a question as it comes to mind for you. I may answer it directly right there in that window, but most likely I will be giving it to our panelists today so they can discuss it with you. And then stay tuned later in this call for a free booklet offer, the top 4 ways to approach major donors this fall. We'll be sharing instructions near the end of the call. Actually, you can see here they're with you now as well. If you just, there's a separate window, a chat window, different from the Q&A. And if you just type yes in that, you'll be able to receive that that free booklet, as well as the email info@moneyforministry.com. Well, I'd like to welcome our presenters today. Mike Buwalda is president and founder of Money for Ministry, and we specialize in estate gift growth for Christian nonprofits. Mike is also the author of the book Ride the Wave: Experience History's Biggest Flow of Wealth and Worship through Estate Gifts. And then we have with us Derek Baker, who has worked with organizations across the United States, Canada, and overseas, helping to raise well over $100 million for ministry. He's been serving since 2000 as a consultant with 2 other large firms that specialize in major gifts. But Derek founded his own firm in 2010, which later merged in 2012 to become Dickerson Baker and Associates, where he now serves as president. And then we did have Paul Martin with us for a moment, and he may or may not be joining us. He had some health issues this morning and is resting this afternoon. I saw him pop on, and now maybe he's off, so he may be joining us as well. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Derek, and let's get started.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Derek, for joining us today on this webinar for your 100th interview now on this topic.
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation. No, it's exciting.
Yeah, we're glad you're here, and we promised the audience to deliver unique value to you about this study, a very exciting study on what major givers are thinking this fall for fall year-end fundraising season, their generosity. And just thank you, audience, for tapping in here today. I just saw the list of all the organizations that have signed on, and wow, it's a wonderful picture of Christian nonprofit America tuned in, your coworkers in the kingdom. Local, regional, national ministries. So welcome to you all. We're going to deliver, like I say, some unique value to you. We're going to do really 2 things for the format. Very simple, as Doug mentioned. 1, I'll be interviewing Derek on this landmark study of major givers. But we're going to, in part 2, give some bonus time to the Q&A. We want to hear from you, your questions on the study, your questions about your #1 challenge this fall. When it comes to major givers and planned gift prospects, as Doug said, we got a lot of questions that already came in before the webinar, so I'm sure we'll get more during the webinar. So we wanted to spend some real time with Derek and I just addressing your specific challenges. He and I both spend all day, every day, working with folks like you, and just we'll do the best we can to address your challenge as well as unpack the study for you. So without further ado, I want to just also highlight one last thing before we jump in with the interview. That booklet Doug mentioned, the thought behind that booklet is that we want to not only give you today a great interview experience and great Q&A, but we want you to leave here with some just real tangible take-home value. So Dickerson Baker and our team at Money for Ministry assembled an action guide to really take today's theme, today's content, and make it really practical, really tangible, that you can put to use this fall as you think about major giver, plan giving strategy this fall. We've got what we think is the best of the best in very succinct form. So just chat yes in the Zoom box below, and our team will get you a copy of that digital booklet. Derek, just to lay some foundation on this study, this exciting study. I remember you and I talked about the idea months ago, and now it's happened. It's just exciting. Just lay some foundation here. What's the story, Derek, behind how this study came to be?
Well, you'll remember, Mike, how quickly this whole COVID crisis came on. We, as a team, we were having our team retreat the last week of February, first kind of that week that trickled into March. And we had some conversation at that time about COVID and how it might affect travel. And then all of a sudden, the very next week, things happened really fast. It's just things happened very quickly. Things started to shut down. And our clients had a lot of questions. We serve as a consulting group. We serve over 100 different organizations, mostly faith-based, but not exclusively, but mostly faith-based nonprofit ministries. And they had a lot of questions about how's this going to affect giving? How's this going to affect, what should we do? And so we held a client conference call at that point. We shared a few things and about one of the things that we did is we looked at what happened to giving through past crises. And I could share a couple of things that we looked at that point. And we've been in business since 1985, and so we go back a little while for about 35 years. And during that time, as we kind of studied the history of this, there's really been three kind of key major events that have happened during the 35 years that we've been in business that have been big enough to actually impact giving, where giving decreased or where the trajectory of giving, kind of changed. And that was in 1987, the Black Monday crisis, September 11, which was 2001, and in the financial markets in 2008. We get to COVID, and we're kind of looking back on some of those. And one of the things that we learned right from the start was giving is resilient. Giving doesn't necessarily do what you expect it to do. And so we wanted to do a study and find out what's going to happen to giving. We needed to answer these questions better than saying, well, this is what happened in prior crises.
Very interesting. So that was kind of the background. It was looking back at prior crises and then all the questions that you're hearing from ministry partners and donors, what's going to happen this fall. And then just to keep looking back for just a second here, as far as context, then the spring, big unknowns, COVID hit, everyone's wondering, anxious. What did you see happen this spring, Derek, and how did that affect the study?
Well, I think a lot of the narrative that folks had was that this is going to have a really negative impact on giving. But I think what a lot of organizations experienced in the spring was all of a sudden you're starting to see these surges in giving. And so what's happening? And right out of the gate, we then started getting questions of, well, how this is going to affect the year-end giving, right? How are people who are giving now? I'd have clients that call me and say, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Bawalda, they made a gift of $10,000 in the spring, and they don't usually give that in the spring. They usually give $5,000 in the fall, but they just gave us a gift of $10,000. This is awesome. Is this an acceleration of their giving, or is this new giving? We just didn't have answers to those kind of questions. And so we felt like, the best way to get answers to questions about giving is to ask donors, right? You've probably experienced that yourself, right? It's like, you got a question, ask your donor. And that's what we decided to do here. We decided, listen, let's talk to donors and see what they have to say. And I can share some of that if you like, specific to that question, if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I've got a slide relative to that I'm going to drop on the screen here for a moment. But it really, what we were told by the donors, 97% of the donors who answered this question. So first of all, 53%, Mike, so more than half of the people that responded to the study. And I should say the study included about 1,000 donors from all over the country. When we launched this study, we have the benefit of having a gentleman on our team, Dr. Verts. Many on the call may know Doc Verts. He taught it and was the president of Northwestern College for a number of years. Doc is a research specialist. He has a PhD in research, and has done a lot of these studies for us, for clients. And we said, Doc, we need you to do a study for all of our clients, and we're gonna cover the cost of it. And he said, right out of the gate, he said, we're gonna need about 1,000 donors to answer the survey. And you know, when you've done online surveys, most people on the line probably know you're gonna get maybe, in a good case, 10%. So we thought, okay, we're gonna need 10,000 folks to send this out to, right? In order to get the kind of margin, 3% margin of error, 95% confidence, in order to get the reliability of the study. And we reached out to a number of different ministries, a number of our clients, a number of others, and 17 of them, which is kind of remarkable. There's 17 different ministries in a time when everybody's hunkering down and really afraid. 17 said, yes, we'll participate. We had a few big ones in particular. NCF was one of those. Wycliffe was one of those. IMB was one of those. That really helped, but we were able to get the survey out into the field and survey close to 10,000 people, not quite. We got over 1,000 responses. And of those responses, 53% said that they had given a special gift in the spring for COVID, over and above. And we asked them, what's gonna happen to giving later in the year? And what they told us is that those gifts, 71%, I'll share this slide on the screen, 71% said that those gifts are going to be over and above what they normally give what they would normally give. And so 26% said, we're not quite sure, but we're not ruling out. Only 3% of those that gave that special gift said that's actually going to decrease their later giving. So we actually think, Mike, I'm not going to stake my reputation on this, but the data suggests, and there's a difference between what the data suggests and what we know from the data. But the data suggests that 2020 might actually be a banner year for giving. And one of the reasons is the first half of the year saw a surge of giving, and 97% of the folks said that's not necessarily going to diminish or decrease our giving in the second half of the year.
And this is a powerful point, Derek. I remember when you and I were first talking about this back in the spring, that as we saw this surge, this uplift of giving happening, a lot of concern among executive directors, advancement directors saying, uh-oh, did we just get the year-end gift now?
That's exactly right.
Your data says no, that's not what happened.
The data says no. The vast majority, 71% of the folks who made those gifts said no. These are above and beyond. This does not affect their later giving. And then another 26% said, we kind of have to see, but we're open to something later. So that, to me, that's really, really heartening news.
So that, friends, that's a little bit of just quick groundwork we want to lay for you to kind of understand the background of the study, what happened this spring on the whole, and how that impacted the study and what they're aiming for. Derek, let's start with the number one thing. What was the number one finding of your study of major givers as you looked at how they're going to think about this fall now? What was the number one finding?
Well, the number one question that we really wanted to answer, Mike, was what's going to happen to giving? Right? I mean, that really, when it boiled down to it, that was the question. What is going to happen to giving in the second half of the year? And so as we looked at that, what we learned, and this is the key finding, I'll share this on the screen as well. The key finding that we learned is that in the second half of 2020, you'll see the gold box on the bottom of the screenshot. 85% of the mid and major donors, and it's important to understand that for this survey, we were particularly looking at mid and major donors. There's been a couple of other studies that have been done on mass. And the reason we did that was, for one thing, that's the segment that we really focus on as a firm. But the other reason is that that's such critically important giving, right? Those donors are the more loyal donors. They're not the impulsive donors that necessarily are just going to give to a specific mailing. And the other reason was, in a time like COVID, right, it doesn't necessarily stop the sort of stuff that you can do to raise money, right? You can continue to send out the mail, right? Where the struggle has been, how do you raise major donors? How do you raise major gifts? How do you see when you can't see your major donors, when you can't engage with them and you can't hold events? But so the really heartening information from the study was 85% of the folks that we talked to in this study said that they're likely to give the same or more in the second half of 2020. And look at the green versus red on the slide. Twice as many said they're going to give more than give less. And this is why I said before, this may suggest that 2020 is actually going to be a banner year, that we're not, particularly in faith-based giving, because this was principally faith-based donors. that twice, we saw a surge of giving in the first half of the year, right after COVID, people responding to that and stepping up, because that's what Christian donors do. They step up, right? They want to help. But then twice as many said, we're going to give more than give less in the second half of the year. So
that's amazing. That's a
really is
powerful, exciting headline. That the spring giving uptick, that was special and unique, but it wasn't the end. Now they're saying, hey, looking at year end, 85% of us major givers are going to give the same or more as last year.
Right. And what's interesting, if you look at the two the darker red and the darker green on this chart, right, 5% said they would decrease significantly. And that 5% was fairly evenly distributed. It's not like the 5% happened to be the biggest donors. There was some segmentation difference in here. For instance, there is a tendency for mid-level donors to even have a higher propensity to give more, which is actually also good news, because as fundraisers right now, we're tending towards more of the mid-level type of fundraising approaches because we can't get out as much as we like to, although the study has something to say about that as well that we'll talk about a little later.
Yep. So I'll pivot in a minute here, Derek, to motivation for giving and approach. But before we do that, let's just land for a second on the red. Any warning signals, warning signs you found in the data about, we hear a lot of good news. Spring was up, year end looks up, but there's some warning message in here too, right?
Absolutely. That one of the things that we're trying to lean into, and this is what we saw in the 2008 financial market crisis. In the Wall Street Journal had an article just a week ago, Saturday, that kind of hinted that some of this is coming. The blue is the 60% that say they're going to give the same, right? And praise the Lord that the green is, kind of bigger than the red, right? More people are going to give more than those who say they'll give less. But what this also means is that only 60% is really stable, not right. The gains in that 25%, those in the green segment, are not going to be evenly distributed necessarily. And the losses in the red are not necessarily going to be evenly distributed. That's what we've seen in last crises. Donors are indicating that they plan to give to a lot of the same charities that they give to before, but there is going to be some impact of this.
That's very helpful. And just as far as the warning is that there are some who are looking at decreasing giving, so it's not all great news. It's mostly good news, but there is some folks in there that are saying, hey, this might be our cutback here.
That's exactly right. 15% are saying that they are going to see some cutbacks. So and other studies have kind of backed it up. We've seen, typically 15 to 17% in other studies. And so it's consistent with other studies. What the other studies haven't necessarily uncovered is the number of folks that are intending to give more. And this study in particular focused on the faith-based donors, and I think we see that trend more. But if you're on the line, to sit back and say, oh, it's all going to be okay, we don't have to do anything different, is not prudent. Because,
all right, I want to touch on the approach for giving this fall, and just to lay some groundwork there, say a word about motivation. What did you find was the motivation for major givers to give in this COVID pandemic era?
Well, let me point out a couple of things first that I think are a little helpful. Back in March, when this all kind of came down, we held a conference call with our donors and with our clients. And one of the things that we said right out of the gate was one of the pieces we leaned in to advise them was, don't assume to know what donors are thinking. Don't make assumptions about your donors. And that's something that we have hit hard on all the time. Don't make assumptions. Ask your donors what they're thinking and get to know your donors, but don't make assumptions. And so what's really interesting, Mike, one of the things that we asked in this study was, how were people impacted by COVID? And what we learned is that 2/3 of the folks who answered this survey said that COVID has had virtually no impact on their households, okay? That, there's been a variety of different things, less than 1/3, and you can see on the screen the different ways that they responded, and they could respond to multiple, and so it doesn't all add up to 100%. But what's really interesting is that the majority of folks are saying, 2/3 are saying we weren't really impacted, right? And 92% of the folks who answered the survey said that they're going to continue to give to the same organizations they did before. But what's interesting also to us was when we looked at what motivated donors to give to what, that the majority of folks are not changing their giving priorities, are not changing their hierarchy. Those folks that are intending to give more are leaning into the things that you see at the top of the screen here: outreach, evangelism, and discipleship, and meeting needs of vulnerable and disadvantaged people at home, and international relief and development. Those are the big three that people want to lean into right now at this time.
The motives, the priorities stayed essentially the same. It's not necessarily COVID-based giving, it's priorities-based giving.
Exactly. And folks so I think one of the lessons to everybody that's on the line today, don't try to bend yourself like a pretzel to try to figure out how to pitch COVID in your fundraising, right? The things that drove donors giving and that touched their hearts pre-COVID are the very same things that are touching their hearts now. Their prioritization hasn't changed. Their hierarchy of giving priorities is exactly the same after COVID as it was before. Those that are planning to give a little less, right, that's more evenly distributed. Those that are saying we're going to lean in and give more, they're tending to prioritize those areas that for Christian donors tend to be closest to their heart.
Love it. So Derek, just to close out our interview here, then we're going to move to Q&A, a lot of questions in the queue. As far as the approach this fall, I'd like to have you say a few words about the approach to major givers. I'll say a word or two about the plan giving side of the aisle, and let's just see where we land on that, and then we're going to dive into some questions. What'd you learn about the approach with major givers this fall?
Two things I think that are really, that really stood out to me. And I would say to folks that are viewing as well, if they want to get a copy of the full report of the study, they can go to our website, Dickerson Baker, and download a full copy of the report and read it in more depth. But two things stood out to me relative to approach, Mike. And the first was not a surprise, right? The first was that ultimately donors are still hesitant about the big gatherings, right? You can see that on the screen, that about a third or so are saying, we're going to wait until there's a vaccine before we come and attend a banquet or a gala. I was struck though that almost half, a quarter at the time we did the study, we fielded the study in June. And so when it says 1 to 2 months, that basically covers us until now. Almost half are basically ready now to attend a banquet or gala, but that's not quite enough to fill the seats. And so for those that are on the line thinking, well, we have something scheduled, what should we do? I would not say automatically cancel it, right? I would probably go forward with it, socially distance, and live stream it for those that won't be able to attend, but I wouldn't necessarily cancel it outright because there's enough people that replied to this that said, hey, we're willing to participate. I'd be a little hesitant to schedule a new event in this context until there's a vaccine readily available for COVID. That's not really a huge surprise. What was a surprise to me is the top two categories of the chart here that basically say by the fall, 75 to 80% of people are going to be ready for one-on-one meetings or for small group gatherings. And so to me, that says, hey folks, we can get away from our screens and get about the relational business of fundraising, right? We want to be sensitive to donors' needs. We don't want to jump the gun with those folks, those 20 to 25%. Mm-hmm. Those tended, by the way, to have some age correlation. Mm-hmm. And so older folks and obviously higher risk folks are tending to be more careful and more cautious. But you've got 2/3 to 3/4 or more that are saying, come October, September, October, come see us. We're ready to see you. Now, the assumption here was that safety protocols and procedures would be in place, right? Social distancing, we said that in the study, assuming that those were in place, would you be ready for these things? So for me, the lesson is, folks, don't assume you just have to work virtually. Don't assume you just have to work the phones. You can actually get out there and see donors and get about the business of fundraising that's so key in major giving.
It's so encouraging, Derek. And tell me if this is an accurate summary, that what they give will be about the same this fall, according to the study, but how they give is adjusting somewhat, right? The big event stuff may be changing, right. Small gatherings perhaps off-site, but not in my home. And the one-on-one, there's a chance to do that, but it's going to be case by case. What they give, about the same. How they give is changing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, changing somewhat. I would say how they give is changing somewhat. And so I think it's really important to have your radar up and be responsive to donors' needs, but don't make assumptions that it's changing for everybody.
Love it. If you want to take your screen share off for a minute here, Derek, I'm going to say a quick word about what we're seeing on the plan giving side. There's also some exciting emerging trends happening there. And of course, plan givers are major givers. Two things I want to share. One is donor advised funds. Donor advised funds are kind of a hybrid between current giving and plan giving. It's plan givers doing the donor advised funds typically. And but as far as what we're seeing happen here, as you see on the screen here, there's $120 billion right now that's been given to charity, but not yet released to charity. It's in the donor advised funds. And it's a huge thing. As I shared on our previous webinar, out of 1.8 million nonprofits now in the US, the top 10 charities in the nation for revenue coming in is no longer charities. There's 4 of them are actual donor advised funds with Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, NCF. This is an amazing emerging, if I can call it the hot stock in fundraising today. There's a lot of low hanging fruit here, folks. And it'd be to your
Mike, I would add to that too. I heard a great story from somebody who really talked about how they took a lesson from Exodus. You know, when Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, and he talked, and the dream was about you had 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. So fill up your storehouses. And in a sense, what folks have done during all the years of plenty that we had, they've filled up their storehouses, which are these DAFs, right?
Yes.
And now they're feeling God kind of saying to them, listen, open those storehouses up.
Now's the time. And good news, folks. We're talking trends today. In a normal year, about 20% of that money in donor advised funds is given to charities. This year, 2020, at the halfway mark, we're at 30% and climbing. There's definitely an uptick in people giving from their donor advised funds. As far as the approach here for you today, I'll just comment briefly, Derek, on what we see on the plan giving side. If you have a comment on the major gift side, we're certainly seeing, like with ministries that we serve, that you can surface your low-hanging fruit. People who have donor advised funds prefer to give that way. You can surface them a number of ways through your normal direct response, mailing appeals this fall, check boxes that I prefer to give through donor advised funds. On your donate page and your website, same kind of checkbox. Donor surveys, we do a lot of those. Different ways that through the mailback conversation, the mailback you're going to be doing all this fall, looking for ways to surface those who enjoy giving in that way. And now you have a fresh pool of people who like to give that way and are part of that 120 billion of money already given to charity, but not yet released to charity. Derek, any just final thoughts on that from a major gift perspective, how you would approach and surface donor advised fund folks?
Absolutely. And it's, it's simple. One of the things that we saw in the study that we've heard from donors that we saw in the study is that, when I showed that slide, 2/3 of folks said that their household has not been significantly impacted by COVID. You might have noticed that one of the top 3 ways that they say they are impacted by COVID is the social isolation, right? A lot of major donors are older folks, and a lot of those folks have, they can't do the things that and they're homebound, right, in many different ways. And so they're feeling lonely and isolated. And from the start of this crisis, right from the start, we've been counseling our clients and others that will listen that call your donors. Just call your donors, pray for them, love on them, have a conversation with them, and just ask them some questions and don't, be soft in the ask right now. That was back in March and April. We've shifted more now because times have changed a lot and donors have adapted a lot. And so we're promoting to say you can be a little more assertive in the ask now, as the needs are there. But call your donors, pray with your donors, talk to your donors, and ask them just some simple questions. And one of the questions you can ask is, do you use a donor advised fund?
Absolutely.
And there's no better way to get information from donors than and you're not picking up the phone to get information from them. You're picking up the phone to love on them, but you can still use that opportunity to learn some things about them and interview them a little bit. And one of those questions that you would ask is, because that's an opportunity for giving. They may not be able to give out of cash right now, but they certainly can give out of their DAF.
Absolutely. One final thought on plan giving, then we're going to pivot to Q&A. This is the big one. Derek mentioned that this could be a banner year for giving in 2020. It already is a banner year for plan giving. In fact, if you look at the trend line, Google Trends, media reports, the interest in plan giving is at an all-time record high in 2020. This is Google's own data from 2004 until today of search terms like making a will and plan giving type terms. It's just going up to 2020. So, and that's good right there, Jeannie, for the slide. I just want to make the point that this is the big year. But here's the disconnect. 90% of your donors don't have their own attorney, don't have advisors like your major givers do, and yet gifts in the will are major gifts. They average around $50,000 each at this point in time. So they're major gifts, but not necessarily coming from major givers. So what we're seeing is that there's also an uptick this year in the use of online wills. We've seen that now for the last several years. And this year, our team, we officially partnered. We looked around at the online will programs, and we liked Dave Ramsey's nationally endorsed program. And we actually partnered with them on the charity side. They were doing all individual wills. And we actually have a partnership with them to make it more available to charities. So I just want to make the point that this is a great year to be promoting for your donors the online will usage. It makes it easy for middle America donors to make a major gift to you in a year when their interest is at an all-time high. COVID has caused people to think about having their own house in order. They've had more time to think about it, do something about it. This is the year, if you're going to ever start or upgrade your plan giving program, this is a great year to do that. And online wills is a wonderful tool we're finding for the middle America donors to become major givers to your organization. We're going to pivot now to your questions. A lot of them have been coming in. And before we do, if I see a lot of folks maybe joined us a few minutes late, I mentioned at the top that for all attendees, if you want to have a booklet to put all these ideas into practice that Derek and I have been talking about, we've got a booklet for you, 4 ways to approach your major givers and plan giving prospects. There it is again. All you got to do is just chat yes in the text box, and our team will get you a copy of that take-home guide, just an action guide, real simple to help you implement what you hear today. Doug, let's go to Q&A. We got a few questions, don't we?
We sure do. Yeah, they're coming, and eager to get into this. So first question, Derek and Mike, and really whoever, but I love this one. My CEO is, you talked about what the fall could be like, and this could be a banner year. My CEO is looking to me and saying, hey, help me plan for the fall and beyond. So I guess we're asking you to look into your crystal ball here, Derek. And what do I tell my CEO? What do I tell my board? What's a realistic goal? What can we expect as we're trying to look ahead here?
Well, 2 things. I think for this year, I think a realistic goal set in 2019 as your benchmark. I would not say go below that. The donors told us, and we've seen this now in our study, we've seen this in a couple of other studies, right? Fidelity Charitable did a study, Dunham has done a study, Campbell Rinker's done a study. There's been other studies out there on the smaller donors, and this study really focused on those higher level donors and on the faith-based market. But every single study has said donors intend to continue giving. Giving is resilient. Donors are I believe there's a likelihood that giving may actually, Christian giving in particular, may actually tick up this year over last year. And so I don't think you have to reduce your goals. I don't think you have to cut your goals. Now, if you have some sort of major expansion project on the slate for the second half of the year, that may take, donors are right now, what they said to us in the study was they're particularly focused on meeting immediate needs. And if there's a project you have where it will help meet and solve immediate needs, that, we're doing, for instance, capital campaign feasibility studies left, right, and center right now. We had a number of them that were paused in the spring. And boards have said, well, let's go ahead and go forward with it. And we've got probably 6 or 7 going on right now. Our team has been in the field doing dozens of interviews with major donors. And what's interesting, by the way, is a side thing, we give the option of you can do them in person or you can do them via Zoom. And 70-80% of them are choosing to do it in person with, safe social distancing. Yep. and masks. But which again backs up what donors are telling us about their willingness to, but major donors are saying our priorities haven't changed. We're not slowing down on giving. We're actually giving more right now. The markets are doing well. The majority of them, 2/3 to 3/4 of them are saying our households are really not financially impacted by this. Take off the cloak of fear, folks, and get about the business of fundraising.
That's right. Let me just jump on that build on what Derek just said, Doug. I've had these conversations with executive teams as well about what do we do now this fall and beyond. There's 2 kinds of approaches here. Go and slow. There are many who are doing what Derek is saying, and they're hitting the go button. We're going to proceed. Our mission must advance. We're going to keep reaching out to donors and engaging and loving and praying and asking. And there are some organizations who are hitting the slow button. let's wait and see, let's be cautious, let's cut back, let's reduce staff, reduce investment in fundraising, et cetera. And we know it's going to happen. If we look at the last 4 national crises, the last with the Y2K and the 2008 recession, et cetera, we know what happens. The ones who hit the go button, the nonprofits who hit the go button, they were 5 times better off than the ones who took the slow, wait and see, cut back approach.
Absolutely. Donors read into that. They see that, they feel that, they read into that.
That's exactly right. Already now they're seeing the results of that. But if you fast forward 6 months, looking at history now, the last 4 national crises is a major difference between the organizations and the boards and the leadership teams who said, we're going, we're all in, our mission's not going away, versus the ones who kind of pulled back and took a slow, cautious approach.
Yep. I'd have one caveat to that, Doug, and that is that there's a number of different organizations that have, it tends to be the smaller grassroots ones that have less sophisticated fundraising operations, and they tend to just rely on a few fundraising events a year to raise their money. Those you're going to need to pivot, right? If you rely on a fall event to raise a big chunk of the money that you need to do your operations, you will need to pivot. You're going to need to pivot because those events are probably not going to draw the kind of so the methods you use in fundraising, you got to lean into the things that are tried and true, like personal fundraising and relational fundraising and using technology and everything else. But events, if you rely on events, you've got to pivot or else you will feel the pinch.
What else you got, Doug?
Yeah, thank you guys. Hey, so just a couple, maybe we can take all these at once, a couple of questions about the survey itself. How many people responded to the survey?
1,079.
1,079. How was the survey delivered? Email or phone?
Email.
All right. And what about age demographics of those in the study?
Fairly across the board. I mean, it reflects the age demographics of donors, particularly mid and major donors. It tilted heavier. We actually had folks in their 20s. We had from 44 different states across the country and the District of Columbia. So it was not particularly too heavily balanced in any one demographic. Anywhere that we saw, Doc Verts is really good at this kind of stuff. Anytime we saw where we were heavy in one area or another for any different reason, he actually did a statistical test to see if there was any statistical difference between the responses from that subset to see if it was pushing the results one way or another. And there was no real statistical difference in those groups.
Awesome. There was a number of questions like that, so it was just great to kind of hit those real quick. I want to go back to this go versus slow. Because I think there's really you guys said some really great stuff, and I want to unpack that a little bit. A couple of different kinds of questions, all similarly related. So one person talked about a campaign that they had launched in January and had to put on pause. Another one's thinking about starting a campaign, or I'm sorry, didn't really get it going. There's another one who wrote in saying, hey, I was hoping to launch something in the fall, and now I don't know what to do. So we've got some that were started that were on pause. We've got some that haven't started. We have some who are looking to start a little bit later on. What would you say to each of those 3 folks in terms of, what do I do? Do I push ahead? Do I pull back? Do I wait? Something in between.
Go ahead, Derek.
A little bit, Doug, it depends on where they are in the process. If they're just starting out, I don't think that there's any downside to starting now. We're working with a lot of different clients. Clark Dickerson, the founder of our firm, who's still really active, was telling me a story about he was out doing feasibility study interviews for a Christian college that's just launching their campaign. And he was interviewing somebody who was a potential 6-figure donor. And that particular donor said to him, it's funny because I'm on the board of XYZ college and they've decided to pause. And I was one of the only ones that was voting to press ahead. And I'm one of the big donors, right? And everybody else is like, oh, we got to stop because donors won't give. And he's like, I'm one of your biggest donors and I'm telling you to go. And they still outvoted and said, we're not going to go. So he says, I guess I'm going to give my gift to this, right? Because that's literally what he told Clark in the feasibility study. Donors are ready to give. They're giving generously. At the same time, we were seeing results come in from this study. It was really interesting because the Chronicle of Philanthropy had published a study. I don't know if you remember this back in June of nonprofit leaders. And that was such a pessimistic outcome of the study. There was so much fear and uncertainty and dread coming through from those leaders. Well, at the very same time, we were seeing the results of our study begin to populate, and it was very positive and heartening from donors, right? There's this disconnect about what people are assuming donors are going to do. And what I'm here to tell you is that donors are prepared to give. They're stepping up. They're putting their foot on the gas, unless they're in a specific situation, unless they're that small minority who have had some significant impact, maybe laid off, maybe the business is hurting. By the way, only 4% said in the study that their business, they own a business that's hurting from COVID, you know? So again, the assumption we would have going into this is that those numbers would be much higher, but the majority of major donors, and particularly a lot of this major giving, a lot of campaign giving comes out of assets. We see growth in the markets. Market just hit an all-time high last week. Business confidence is there. Consumer confidence is there. I would say don't assume that you can't do your project.
I would agree. Doug, just to bounce on that a little bit, is what we see in plan giving every day. We sometimes in our team talk about optimal launch windows. When's the best time? We get that question all the time. When's the best time to launch or accelerate a plan giving program? And we used to say anytime except Christmas and summertime. But then Dan from our team looked at all the data and said, boy, summertime has actually been a wonderful time. And this year was no exception. We had exceptional growth in estate gifts this summer in the middle of all the COVID concern. Plan giving is on the rise. So we'd say as far as the fall, there's a great synergy between current giving, you're giving now for major givers, and plan givers. We often say one of the best ways to maximize current giving is to emphasize future giving. There's a real correlation there that as people begin to move into your pipeline of thinking about their legacy and their future and your future, that has an accelerant on their current giving. You saw the data, maybe you saw the data from Russell James this last month, just reinforced what we've been seeing for years, that people who enter the plan giving pipeline give a lot more now. So if you're able to bring those two together this fall and emphasize future giving while you're promoting current giving, you're going to see a double impact.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, the questions keep coming in. I'm trying to kind of wade through them all. So there's a lot here. Thank you. Here's one about the election. And we all know the election's coming. It's getting a lot of publicity. There's a lot of attention. This one maybe more so than any election in the last 20 years. How do you see, whichever way it goes, that the election, what kind of impact will it have on giving?
You know, I would say first out that this particular study did not focus anything related to the election at all. It was purely COVID and the economy. I will say, though, that earlier this year, we actually did a study internally in our firm to look at the impact of election years on giving, because we were getting that very same question from a lot of our clients as well. And the reality is, if you go back 40 years, there is no correlation whatsoever between giving and election years. In actual fact, there's a slight, it's statistically insignificant, but there is a slight uptick in giving in election years over and above 501c4 giving. This is 501c3 giving, which is interesting. But the strongest correlation between giving is giving in the economy, giving in the markets, right? There's correlation between the markets and there's giving between the economy. And specifically, the correlation is between economic perception more than economic reality, right? Giving tends to follow economic perception. It's kind of like in business markets, consumer confidence, you know, donor confidence, right? In the economy tends to impact their generosity, the level at which they're going to give. And so there tends to be now. So the question is, what happens in the election? How does that affect what happens in the economy or people's perception, donors' perceptions of the economy? What we find every single time, I mean, you go back to 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, right? Everyone's like, oh, the world's gonna, right? It's crazy. He's, you know, this or that. What's gonna happen? What's the first thing he did? He put in charge a really, you know, well-known Fed person right out of the gate. The first thing that folks try to do is they try to soothe any concerns about the economy. No, what they say during the election and what they do as soon as they're elected, regardless if they're left, right, or center, they tend to be very careful about the economy. I wouldn't expect anything different from Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And so I don't know that, you know, come February next year after inauguration, people are going to change. You know, there may be some short-term concerns, but I don't think that's necessarily going to impact giving one way or another. It has tended to not.
Okay, super. Thank you. Next question, and this has to do with the inability, or maybe we should say the perceived inability, to meet with donors face to face? I know you addressed this through your slides in your presentation. I was talking with someone this morning who said he has been turned down for a number of face-to-face meetings in the last month. So I know, again, your statistics were maybe pointing a different picture. What would you say to someone like that? There are some questions coming in about that too, about just that face-to-face meeting. How do I get it? What do I do different now, or maybe not?
Yeah, I think being sensitive to people's needs, don't make assumptions, but just ask. Don't assume that they won't see you, right? But still 20 to 25 at least are not going to see. So, right, until there's a vaccine in place. But I think asking for the appointment and giving people the option. I point to the experience we're having meeting with major donors in the context of feasibility studies. And it's consistent with the statistics that we saw in the study. 75 to 80% are saying, yes, we'll meet you in person, whether that's at the mission or at the rescue or at the Salvation Army or at the Christian school or at wherever. They're willing to meet in person once we explain that, hey, these are the measures we'll have in place, but it's your option. If you'd like to come in person or schedule it via Zoom, we'll do whichever you prefer. You're asking for the appointment, right? And then you're making so here's one of the key things about asking for an appointment. Don't make it a yes or a no to the appointment. Make it a yes or a no to, would you like to see me by Zoom or would you like to see me in person? Okay. Then you still have the appointment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good move. And I would say ditto to all that, Doug, for the plan givers, the hidden major donors, with one caveat. In addition to the face-to-face or Zoom calls or meeting at the school or what have you for the plan gift prospects, as we've seen in so many times, plan givers have a massive preference for conversation via mailbag correspondence. We certainly encourage and train on face-to-face and digital and events, but across the board, even the major and even the mega givers have a massive preference for the mailback conversation. So we would encourage you to keep reaching out to your plan gift prospects. And we found about an 85% preference. Even as one we did about a year ago, it was only mega givers, large givers. It was one of our highest in programs ever. Was still, they prefer to talk with their spouse, pray about it, and write back their response to us via mail before they ever met anybody in person. So there you have a tremendous advantage going in the fall here with an all-time high interest to use the tools available to you, whether it's in person or mailback. As Derek said, being sensitive to what the donor wants, as we often say in our shop, serve the donors the way they want to be served. We don't assume anything.
Absolutely.
We go down the path that they are most comfortable with. And when you go down that path, whether it's mail, digital, events, personal contact, you'll find your results will grow exponentially.
And Doug, I just want to reinforce what I said earlier too about, one of the things that we do a lot of is training in the art of the ask. And if you make the ask a yes, no question, right, then you're going to get 50% yes, 50% no, typically, right? But when you ask a question and you make it an A-B choice, right? And in this case, the question is not, will you see me or not see me? The question is, would you, we'd love to come and talk to you about kind of some of the things that we've got going on and some exciting initiatives we've got going for the fall despite COVID and actually somewhat because of COVID. And would it work better for you if we met in person or by Zoom? Because, we found that donors are willing to do either or. It's kind of like when we ask for a gift, it's like, don't ask, will you give this or not give this? Would you consider, do you prefer, would you give something along, last year you gave $10,000. Would you give that again this year, or would you consider giving even 15 for this, right? You give them an A-B choice instead of a yes, no choice. And that's some of the art of the ask. But when asked right, you will find that the majority will opt for in-person.
Options. Do you like to use donor advised funds? Would you consider an online will just presenting options to people that are all positive for them and for your ministry is the way to go. Well said, Derek.
The assumption should be these donors want to meet. The question is how? Zoom, in person, phone, we can make it work. I love it.
Right. I wouldn't ask them for a meeting if you're not having the assumption that they want to meet.
There you go. That's great. Another question here. And again, I love this data. It's really good. So you're saying the donors want to keep giving, overwhelming majority. This person says, my charity actually has experienced a $3 million hit this fall. I know and I've heard this too, most of them are seeing a surge, but there are some that are not. So since March of 2020, $3 million hit, we're making cuts, we're streamlining budgets. What do we do wrong? Why are we taking a hit and others aren't? And what can we do to correct course?
Mhm.
That's a great question, and I would probably suggest an offline conversation for that. We'd love to help whoever it is figure that out. There's no easy answer to it.
Mhm.
I would have some questions. For instance, is it hit in giving versus a hit in, have they changed kind of what are they, what are they, what's their focus and cause? That shouldn't be the cause of the change. I would need to ask some more questions. We'd want to dig into it a little bit, but I'd be careful to assume it's just all COVID. Sometimes some simple things can make a big difference. And so, again, 3 million sounds like a lot of money, but are they a $5 million organization, or are they a $30 million organization, or a $40 million organization?
I had 2 calls just like that exact question in the last 30 days. And one was very event reliant. The event was there, massive, reaching new donors and new gifts. And so had to make some adjustments there as far as their approach. And the other organization was also looking at the same type of numbers. And they really did not have a very well thought out major gift strategy. It was very dependent on other things to raise money for years, a lot of digital marketing, a lot of direct response, and really didn't have a robust major gift program. So it may, as Derek said, it may be, if we could talk to some folks like that, there's probably some things we could find in your approach that we could help you with to improve that picture in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and I'd encourage that. I mean, that individual, if they want, they can reach out directly to me, and we can talk through that situation specifically a little bit, and I'll see what we can do to help. I would say this, however, what we've seen in past crises, we've seen, right, going back to 1985, those 4 different crises that happened. Giving typically was impacted about 3 to 5% per year. The worst one was in 2008, where it was 5.5%, and then 2009 there was another 5%. So it impacted giving for 2 years. But here's the thing: very few organizations were impacted. Very few organizations that you talk to said, "Oh yeah, we had a 5.5% decrease in 2008 and a 5.5% decrease in 2009." What happened is those gains and losses are not evenly distributed, and some people really saw a big significant hit, and some folks did not. And some of that had to do with the posture of the organization. Some of that had to do with the reliance on the methodology. Some of that had to do with messaging. A lot of different things can cause that, but it's not going to be just nice and even across the board. And the onus is on us as the fundraising professionals to make sure that we are doing what we need to do to be on the gain side of that ledger to the best of our abilities and to the best of our of what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Hey, just a word to all of our participants. There's a lot of questions coming in. We probably have time for about one more. I do want to say, as I look through some of them, I believe our team is really interested in connecting. So we'll really try to connect with you, perhaps individually, with some answers. I know there's some questions about the online will, which are a little bit specific, and the online will options. So just know that we can help you with that after the call. One last question here I'd like to put to both of you. How would you recommend to update major donors on the helpful provision in the CARES Act, taking away the % limit of contributions, and also reminding them of the advantage of donating appreciated securities?
Mike, you want to take first half of that, and I can take another half?
Yeah, just when you mentioned the provisions of the CARES Act, legislation can oftentimes affect how people do their giving. In particular, in the planned giving world, we saw that when the threshold was raised several years ago to $22 million per household. There was some concern there about what's going to happen to planned giving. When we look at I'm going to say planned giving first, and Derek, flip it to you for major giving. On the planned giving side, that means that very, very few people are concerned about estate taxes. For 40 years, that was the driving concern of planned giving marketing. How do you save money on taxes for your planned gift? And the reality is only maybe 1.5% or less of all estates in America are paying the estate tax. So most folks are not motivated by legislation. They're not motivated by what's happening with the CARES Act or what the newest law. They're motivated by what Derek said earlier. My giving priorities we find in the plan giving world, as we ask people, why are you considering a legacy gift to this organization? It has a lot to do with worship. A sense of that my entire life is an act of worship to God, and I want to give him an offering of praise and thanks. That is the numero uno driver of legacy gifts. So I would just say on the plan giving side, I wouldn't get too caught up in the latest legislation. I would focus on the worship intent, the worship motivation, and giving them the tools to express that worship to God as an act of worship as a gift to your ministry. Derek?
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%, Mike. One thing I would add to that, I have a good friend who runs a big CPA, one of the big national CPA firms in the country, one of the top, I guess, top 10. And he told me that in their practice, what they've seen from that specific CARES Act increase of the minimum, that actually led to a pretty strong surge of giving into donor advised funds, and that a lot of their CPAs were using that and saying, here's an opportunity to move some of that money into your donor advised fund, that more than you would normally be able to, because a lot of them have kind of projected out giving, or if they're selling business, and it comes into the estate planning much more than it comes into, I think, the day-to-day donor discussion. So there is some added incentive, particularly for those folks who are retired and are perhaps living on fixed income and are giving out of assets, and there's a limitation to how much that they can give because their income is fixed. They're living on a relatively fixed income, but they're trying to make big gifts, and they can only write off a certain percentage of those. Now they can write off twice as much as they could this year before. So being mindful of those sort of opportunities and making sure that those donors know that, and putting that in some of your donor communications, I think is helpful, but I would not lean too heavily into that.
Amen.
Thank you both. This has been just wonderful. I love the questions from the audience. It's fun to sift through them and see what's coming. And then to hear you guys respond, it's been great. Thank you so much. I did want to say just a word. I mean, there's been a few folks many folks have requested the booklet, and some of you were concerned because it was in one on the chat window versus the Q&A. We've got it all, so no fear. We'll get you that booklet. It's coming your way. We've been able to capture and save that. So again, we're just really grateful for you to join us today. We'll look forward to, again, sending you that booklet. If you haven't yet, you can chat yes in the chat window, or you can email info@moneyforministry.com. Either way, we'll get you a copy of that booklet. And one more time, a thank you to Mike and to Derek. And as we close today, I'd like to really offer a prayer for all of us. I know at Money for Ministry and at Dickerson Baker, our focus is on faith-based, ministry-minded nonprofits. And we know this has been a challenging time in many ways. Many of the folks we talked to, there is COVID in their ministry, among their staff, among their donors, and that just creates a lot of challenges, as well as the ongoing operations and the fundraising and everything that goes with it. So we'd like to pray for you today and give thanks for this time together. So will you join me?
Doug, before you do that, can I just give a call out to Paul Martin? Paul was supposed to be with us on the call today. Paul was pretty instrumental in this study and in the research and in helping to conceptualize it. He oversees all of that for our firm. As you mentioned early on, he had an injury that he needed to have tended to, and so he has. So we didn't know if he was going to make it on or not, but I want to give that call out to Paul. I know he's been in attendance, but we didn't quickly pivot. And so thank you to Paul as well. And the fact that he's here means that he was able to get that taken care of and join us. So.
Excellent. Thank you for that update, Derek. Appreciate it. Yeah, let's pray together. Begin with the words of Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we do not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, and though the oceans roar and foam and the waters quake with their surging. There is a city whose streams make glad, the city of God. And we just really now more than ever cling to the hope and the promises that come from Psalm 46 and from the whole Bible, that we need not fear. There's definitely work to be done. And there's certainly people to be served, and there are the mission to which we've been called continues, but we can do so in faith and in hope that you are in control of all things and watch over us in so many ways. We pray a special prayer for Paul today, that you'll continue to heal and restore him, and for each ministry represented on this call. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you all. Glad you came.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Derek.
Bye-bye.